you tonight. Sheraden Nicholau from the State Council on Disabilities, Developmental Disabilities, will be doing a presentation on advocacy and system change. And I'm passing on to you, Sheraden.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Elena. And thank you so much to Septar and the executive team for having me here. Glad to be here. And I hope it's the first of other interactions and collaborations that we can have together. I see some folks that I know here. I see some folks I don't know, which means you may not know me either, and would love to come back or see how our Office of the State Council can support the work that all you are doing in Redwood City for your students and for the broader community. So thanks for that. So I'm going to share screen here and pop up a deck. That means I'm not going to be able to see hands. So this is where some of this is me giving some information and suggestions to you. Other parts are where I want to hear feedback or ideas that you have or ways that you each engage in advocacy. So don't bother raising hands or being polite. Just shout out, jump in. Let this be a casual discussion for us all, okay? So let me get this puppy up and going for us. And let me move some stuff around so I can at least see you a little bit. All right. Wonderful. Let me move that here. Great. So advocacy for impact, and specifically thinking about how we use advocacy tools to both help yourself and your student, but more importantly, to also look at how we change the broader community for all students and all families. That's some of our focus today. Let me minimize this here. Too many windows open. All right. So first, a little bit about me and about the State Council. So the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, I have some slides that talk about the scope of our work. But first, let me just talk about me. I'm here in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has been my home for quite some time, and born here and spent most of my years here. And I'm the regional manager for the State Council. And so I oversee both our federal work and our state-focused work in 5 counties here in the Bay Area, including San Mateo County, where most of you are, San Francisco, Marin County, Contra Costa, and Alameda counties, also covering some state research projects, well, some national research projects for California. And I think right now, my little team and we're covering about 10 counties worth for those things. So we get around a little bit. I also spend plenty of time in Sacramento, more time than I'd really like to. My favorite thing is to be here at home in the Bay Area and to work with wonderful folks like you all and like so many of your students and community members. And, you know, we're going to be talking a lot about advocacy, and let's just talk big picture, very broad, right? So if we're thinking broadly, advocacy is about speaking up for yourself, a loved one, or somebody else entirely to ensure that they are treated fairly and receive the help and the access and the equity that they deserve, right? In just the most plain, broad way that we can possibly look at that. And so I mentioned earlier, the State Council, we're both state and fed, so we're established in both state and federal law. We are an independent, federally funded state agency in that sense. And our focus is Californians with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we advocate and promote and implement policies and practices that achieve self-determination, independence, productivity, and inclusion in all aspects of community life for people with IDD, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and their families. But a lot of our work is also cross-community. So that includes other disabilities outside of intellectual and developmental disabilities, and it includes other groups entirely outside of the broader disability community. And we work with policymakers and other stakeholders to make sure that policies that are impacting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are contributing to those folks experiencing equality of opportunity and that full participation and economic self-sufficiency, like we mentioned. And as a part of that, we work to address disparities in all areas of access. And that includes for services and supports that are disability specific. It includes housing, employment, healthcare, public safety, you name it, covers quite a lot of things. And we're called the State Council, so we're overseeing, our leadership body is a state council. It's made up of 31 members, governor appointed. 20 of those 31 members are not related to state departments. They are individual leaders in the community who reflect the socioeconomic and the geographic and the racial and ethnic and language diversity of all of the state, and are also, by the way, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities or family members of people with IDD here in California. So that's 20 of the 31 members. And then the rest of the members in the state council are from either directors or designees from these state departments that you see here. So everyone from departments like Health and Human Services, Department of Developmental Services, that's the department that oversees regional centers and partners with contracts with nonprofit regional centers. That includes Department of Rehabilitation, Department of Education, of course, Department of Healthcare Services, Department of Aging. And then we also have 4 federal partners that are on the State Council as well, including Disability Rights of California and the 3 University Centers for Excellence on Developmental Disabilities. So here in this area, that's UC Davis, their Mind Institute. And then we have 2 in Southern California as well. And so the work at 30,000 feet. So a lot of the work that we do that's funded federally is focused on kind of these 3 buckets of work. So advocacy, we're helping people with their self-advocacy skills and general systems advocacy skills. We do that through a variety of things, including technical assistance, systems navigation, training, and that kind of thing. We also advance public policy and work on legislation or policy that could be statewide level or local level. And then capacity building, which can include everything from serving on coalitions and committees. It can also include grant funded projects, giving grants to the community, sponsorships for best practices and promising practices across the community. And when we're thinking about who is our core focus would be about the approximate 620,000 Californians with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So infants, children, adults, seniors. And then that includes outside of that number, outside of the 620,000, and that's a very conservative number, then you're looking at their families as well. Those are main stakeholders for us. And then we're also, focused on people that are still in developmental centers. And that's thankfully, under 150 people in the state, but we do still have a small amount of individuals who are in developmental centers or locked facilities. And then our work is driven by our 5-year state plan that we develop, that we file with the feds, and we work closely with our community on. And because California is so geographically and culturally diverse and expansive, we don't just have an office in Sacramento, thankfully. We have 12 regional offices across the state. And at the end of this deck, and we'll make sure your SEPTAR executive team here will make sure that you get both a copy of the deck as well as some handouts. And in the deck, we have a variety of links to different resources, including contact information for all of the State Council regional offices across the state, in case you have friends, family members, or other folks in your network that live elsewhere in the state. And we do a lot directly with the community, the regional offices do. So it's oftentimes that we're asking for community input, or we're sharing data, or helping people learn how to analyze existing data or trending to address systemic concerns. We help people identify existing supports and services that might benefit them or others in their community, and work together to identify, okay, what's not working about systems now. And when we say systems, that can be really anything under the sun. And then working together to do that, and always coming from a place of wanting the community members to lead wherever possible, especially people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Building leadership in that community is very, very important for a more equitable future for us all, really. Okay, So here's where we kind of get our big picture hats on here, okay? So you've probably, as family members or as educators of young students, you spend plenty of time thinking about and discussing probably education-specific systems or education-specific terms associated with students' rights. You may be thinking a lot of FAPE, right? Free, appropriate, and public education. You might be thinking of IDEA, right? That's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act on the Fed level. You might be thinking about your child or another student's IEP, their individualized education program, or the concept of least restrictive environment and what that looks like in the law, the place where a student is assumed to be unless a student needs to be in a different location to meet the goals based on their own individual needs. So, we get caught up, right? We get caught up in the lingo. We get caught up in focusing on our particular student or the students in our area. But in your hard work and your advocacy for your students' needs, don't forget to make some time to think about the broader future that you want to see for your student. So the bigger picture beyond school, beyond childhood, we have to make the time, even if it's just the littlest amount of time, even if it's just an hour or two a quarter, really. Spend that time thinking about how you want your student or your students to enjoy their life, to utilize their community and be a part of their larger community. How do you want them to experience things like housing and employment, healthcare, recreation, social gatherings, relationships, all of those things, right? So you all are working so hard now, and this is oftentimes described as the very most difficult and challenging time of your lives is right now, when your student is young and you're in the process of gathering resources and allies and figuring out, okay, how do we start to take this on? How do we work with these different systems to support my loved one or the students in my area? But wanted to point out that what we're shooting for here is a future with true inclusion, right? Not integration, certainly not segregation, but true inclusion, where that access and that sense of belonging, right? You hear a lot about belonging now when talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, that an important part of that is about belonging. And that's how you know that we've moved from integration, which is the start, but not the end goal, and towards a community that's about inclusion. And so advocacy has a big place in that, right? It's such an important tool in policy change and in systems change for civil rights, for human rights. I'm curious if people can shout out, what type of advocacy have you been involved in? Maybe currently with your student, or maybe it has nothing to do with your student. Maybe there's other advocacy that you've been involved in your lifetime. Would love to hear some examples. I'm sure we have some good advocates in the room.
So I don't know if you saw I tried to just message it so I wouldn't interrupt your slide. But how would we go about, like, we want to be advocates for kids, specifically kids who it is been made known by parents that their child has a special disability, and staff members claim to accommodate the child, but behind closed doors are not accommodating the child with special needs. And being a witness to that, how do we go about, like, reporting it outside of just talking to the directors of the program and kind of being brushed off as dramatic?
Yeah, so that's very specific. What I want to do here is pop in the chat, because we're covering different types of advocacy, and I don't want us to go too far off track into something very specific. But May, I want you to email me so you can share more with me about what you're seeing or what you or your student are experiencing, and we can talk a little bit. The first thing I would ask you questions about is your child's IEP, and if it's a up to date and valid and thoughtful, and if, because that, remember, that's your contract with the state, contract with the district. So that's the first thing. But if you're seeing systemic lack of accommodation broader than one individual student's 504 plan or their IEP, I have some other hints or some other recommendations as well. But for the sake of tonight, because you're thinking of some very specific circumstances, I want to be able to take that offline, and happy to have that conversation.
Oh, right.
Send you some resources.
I'm also mentioning it as just also like I'm happy to email you regarding a specific situation, but in just a broad term of it, like, it is a common thing that children with disabilities aren't really being accommodated without an additional expense to a parent.
Yeah. So on most cases, May, what that ends up look like is either the IEP is not up to date and enforced, or the IEP is up to date and enforced, but we're talking about general larger groups of kids, some of which may not have an IEP or a 504 plan, and a general culture of lack of accessibility within a specific school. It may involve connecting with a special education director or an assistant superintendent. It might involve getting in contact with the school board and making this an issue that the trustees are looking at. Or it could be something, depending on the trending and the details around it, could be something that filters up to action to be taken on a CDE, a system-wide level. So there's different levels of where that issue and lack of accommodation may stem from. And we'll talk about some of these levels, or some of these ways, some of these places to go to start to collect data or to share experiences on a school level. So we'll talk about that today as we kind of go through this. And like I said, I'm also happy to come back and to talk exclusively about issues around accommodations and IEPs, that kind of a thing too. And I think you have some other speakers also that your executive team has an eye on to bring to also talk about that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. In general, though, if we pan out and think again about that bigger picture, whether you're talking about an individual school or a city or a county or a state or a federal government, reminding that these are put in place with your tax dollars, right? And so they exist to serve people. So whether we're talking disability specific or generic services, they need to be functional, they need to work, very basic, right? And so in general, you want to be able to identify policymakers. And that's why, you know, we mentioned earlier, levels are different. So we might be talking about an individual, how a specific classroom operates. We might be talking about how a department or a district operates. We might be talking about how a state or the California Department of Education is operating. But we want to make sure that policymakers at each of those levels is about what the needs are for the community and are making decisions with the community and not for the community. And then you all, as advocates, as family members, as parents, as educators, have an obligation to monitor and to advise these systems in a variety of ways. And there's a lot of ways to monitor and advise these systems. There's a place for everybody in this work, no matter what level that you're focused on. If you're focused on your individual students' experience in their classroom, or you're focused on the experience of kids that are in your neighborhood or in your district or anywhere in California. And I want to give some examples of how to advise and monitor systems. So for the public sector, that could be advisory bodies or advocacy groups, public comment sessions, focus groups, listening sessions, school board meetings, SELPA meetings, right? So many examples there. And other examples can include advisory bodies that might be public-private partnership, or might be funded or not, stipend or not, in service. This can include grassroots coalitions. And grassroots coalitions can be brought together for a single purpose, or might involve communities that have different focuses but are working together on a common goal. And then I want to make sure that people are also thinking about coalition and leadership work and advising work that includes people with disabilities, including students with disabilities. And there's a lot of great examples here in the Bay Area, whether that's consumer advisory committees or work that's happening in different SELPAs and in different PTAs, where students are intimately working side by side with other advocates and leaders to make changes and are sharing their reflections and their input of their experiences. And so wanted to find out just if people who can give us some examples of what, when you or your family member has experienced decisions being made for you where you weren't involved and you were just told after the fact. Who's got a couple of examples? Doesn't have to be school related, it could be anything really. Where you read about a new law or a new policy and you're thinking, when was this discussed and who made this decision? Anybody have any examples?
I do. PG&E, they're always raising the rates for electric, and and every time it happens, we're like, when did that happen? Who's deciding that? Who's regulating this? And it's in those little flyers in your bill and nobody looks at them.
Yeah,
that's where the information is, but everybody is all, you always hear people say, why is my bill so much more? When did they raise it?
That's a great example. And I'm wondering, has anybody here been to a Public Utilities Commission meeting, a PCUP meeting?
I didn't even know they were available.
Yeah, they hold public meetings, right? And the California Public Utilities Commission, they are responsible, right, to help make sure that utility companies like PG&E are accountable to the people, and that the people know about the decisions that are happening and can give input to the commission, so that the commission can in part oversee and give rails and guidance and limitations to public utility companies that are private businesses. Yeah, that's a great example. Any other example before we move on? All right, we'll move on. I have some other examples, so we'll share that coming up here. But I wanted first to cover just a couple of elements, just a few small things. I promise I'm not going to be quoting regulations or statute to you tonight, I promise. But I want to cover at least, just a couple of really basic things in the California Constitution, okay? Because it's, again, thinking that big picture about that these are your systems and you have a right to be involved. So California Constitution, Article 1, Section 3, in plain language, this says that, you have a right to inform your representatives about what issues impact you. And you have a right to ask that policy and legislation help people and solve problems that you've identified that people have. And you have a right to organize for the good of your community. So there's that piece there. Also in that same section, in plain language, this says that to help you do the work of advocacy in your community, you can have access, you should have access to information about the actions and the votes that your representatives or your policymakers make, that you should have access to public meetings, and you should have access to documents that are shared in those meetings, whether you're talking about agendas or hearing materials or language in bills and policies that are being discussed. Yeah. And in short, with some of these rights, what we're seeking to do is to educate policymakers. And remember, when we say policymakers, I'm not just talking about legislators, I'm talking about all levels, from your local park and rec program deciding how they're going to run their after-school cooking class, right? That can be a policymaker, all the way up to your congressional representative, okay? So we need to educate those policymakers about our lives and about the barriers that we experience or that our loved ones experience. We want to help them come up with solutions. We also want to let them know what's currently working, by the way. That's really important, right? Because you want to scale what's working and correct what's not working. And that back and forth process of saying what's working, what's not, and here's the solutions, that works best when there's a sustained and productive relationship and a feedback loop. Yeah. So going back to the foundation is about educating your policymaker, small level, small local level or statewide level. And an important part of being successful in advocacy for yourself and others is that relationship building. So we'll chat a little bit about what that looks like. And again, those concepts apply to local level or to state or national level relationship building. But what I'll do is I'll try to give some examples that are very specific to education, because I know that's probably on the hot list for so many of you this evening, because that's where the greatest need is right now, depending on how your student is doing. And your student is early in their academic career. You are early in your journey of helping be the best advocate you can for your student or your students. So, I want you to think about this very simple equation. Data plus personal experience times frequency, that's effective advocacy right there. Plain and simple. I have not found a better equation that really speaks to effective advocacy. And so it comes from the standpoint of understanding that you all are teachers in this, right? And that policymakers are often the student. And so being able to provide some data and coupling that data with your personal experience and then keeping that communication frequent, that's really the work there. I'm curious if anybody here has an example that they can share about how they advocated for themselves or a loved one using that combination of data, whatever it was, trending data, actual numbers from a report, dollar amount, plus your personal experience or your student's personal experience, and then keeping up the communication. Does anybody have any example of that in their personal life or professional life?
I did as a teacher.
Yeah, tell us.
As a preschool teacher, I have friends who are behavioral therapists and speech pathologists, and also being a parent of a child who has a learning, not necessarily a learning disability, but being delayed in his speech.
Mm-hmm.
I have actually been able to have that formula and present it as an advocate for other children as a preschool teacher.
Fabulous. Yeah. So in your experience, does that work? Can you see that working even across multiple issue areas?
I mean, it didn't necessarily work with my particular experience of the outcome, but I do believe that it can work with a body that is willing to hear you out and really understand where you're coming from with the information.
Yeah. And sometimes you bring up a great point. So when you're dealing with really gnarly or very embedded systems or leadership bodies that are not interested in getting that feedback and then making decisions based on it, the key in your equation, the key in your formula here is the frequency. And frequency also includes the numbers of people that are using data plus their personal experience, right? To give that input. I have seen it, not in this area, but in some areas of California, you might be shocked to know that in some areas, there's not the healthiest collaborative working relationship between the community and, let's say, their school board. And so what we've seen in other areas of the state is when you have some of that conflict, when families and teachers and advocates in the community are able to build coalitions to say, hey, we're all stretched as parents or as educators. We can't show up at every meeting all the time, but can we communicate, whether it's a Facebook group or a group text or, finding other ways for us to say, okay, can we make sure that we can at least get 10 people at every meeting? We can divide the load. And then here's the data that we have, up-to-date data. Here's personal experiences people have, and just keep it coming, right? Divide and conquer in that sense. We've seen that make a big difference, just, using education as an example. And so, for some people, it's very clear. They know exactly what it is about the area of impact. Maybe it's specifically inclusion in your kid's classroom. Maybe it's your park and rec department is not accommodating and doesn't know how to have inclusive programming. Maybe it's your transportation system is not functional. Maybe it's your housing. You have some fair housing issues and you need to know your housing rights and get more involved in housing advocacy. Whatever it happens to be, a good place to get started if you're not quite sure is to first list people in your circle or your students' circle, and to have a sense of, you know, what are those topics or those issues that impact your life most deeply in areas that you think you might want to get involved with the very limited time that you have. And talk to people too. You know, sometimes we get a tunnel vision, just focusing on the problems of the day or the problems of the week with ourselves, with our loved ones. But if you talk to the people that are closest to you, you can get a sense of what the trends are, or what are the issues that deserve some extra attention and are going to impact more people in your immediate circle. Kind of develop and talk to those top 5 folks to get a sense of that. And then it's about connecting those issues to what are the systems that oversee those issues or that are decision-making bodies for those issues, right? So thinking about what are the systems, or where does the taxpayer dollars go, or who's in charge of oversight for whatever that issue, wherever that issue lands that you want to spend a little bit more time about. So let's talk some examples. So if my issue is about my loved one not having social activities after school and on the weekends, the systems involved might be the park and rec department, might be my local YMCA. It might be the sports programming in my area. Or if my issue is about getting help at home for my student that has high support needs, then the systems involved might be IHSS, might be the regional center system and Department of Developmental Services. It might be Medi-Cal or my health insurance and my medical providers, right? And thinking about just education-focused examples, have any of you reviewed your students' school's accountability report cards? How many folks even knew that your school has an accountability report card that comes out each year? Anyone? So they're posted, they're available for you to read and for you to use in your advocacy. And they're posted in both English and Spanish. And I can make sure to get that. You can find that on the Redwood City School District website. And you're looking for, they call them like the SARC reports. And so it's under the programs and services. And I can give you the link in a little bit if you'd like. I can't copy and paste while I'm screen sharing, it looks like at the moment. But that's available. It's available on your school district site, and you can look at the year 2021 and through 22. So this last year, look at your school's accountability report card and take a look at trending and performance. And then also for every one of those accountability report cards for schools, they have a couple of like resource pages in the front of those reports. And those resource pages in the front of those reports include some very, very helpful data resource sites, including DataQuest. Who here has heard about DataQuest? Anybody? So it's an online tool that the California Department of Education on school performance, that they create this. DataQuest is one of the best places to collect data that's going to help you partner that data with your story or what you're experiencing around school performance. Same thing with, and this is also, by the way, on your accountability report cards, your school report cards, is what's called the California School Dashboard. And again, it's a link that the California Department of Education has that will give you some performance indicators and show some, oh, thank you so much, Elena. Yeah, really, really helpful. Great. Yeah, Claudia, Elena just posted it there. So the first couple of pages of any of those reports, you're going to see the link for DataQuest, and you're going to see the links for the California School Dashboard. Very, very helpful for data there. Okay. And I'm curious, how many of you all are involved in your local SELPA, your special education local plan areas? Do we have anybody that's super active with their SELPA?
Yes, I'm
Hola,
involved.
buenas tardes. Buenas tardes. ¿Me podrían hacer el favor de interpretar? Yo quisiera preguntar, después de estar involucrados en estas actividades, porque soy miembro de DILAC, de la mesa directiva de mi escuela, de la mesa directiva del distrito escolar, del concilio donde vemos la medida T, y justo estoy revisando, ¿no? Todos estos informes de datos, pero después de eso, ¿qué sigue? Porque hemos hablado con el maestro John Baker, le hemos hecho ver las necesidades de nuestra escuela, como falta de mobiliario adecuado, aire acondicionado, ¿no? Sabemos que nuestros niños necesitan, pues, condiciones más estables, ¿no? Por lo menos de temperatura, personal docente, todas las áreas de la escuela. Mis hijos van a la escuela Hoover. En todas las áreas se ha visto disminuido el personal. Entonces, ya hablé con la maestra Guadalupe de Hoover. Tenemos una cita la siguiente semana con el doctor Baker. Y después de este análisis, ¿qué sigue? ¿No? Porque quiero saber cómo puedo impactar y beneficiar a los niños, ¿no? Que tienen educación especial, porque como Elena también lo mencionaba, el compartir la información a los papás que están pues llegando a nuestras escuelas es súper importante, ¿no? Afortunadamente hay un centro familiar, pero carece de información de todos estos vínculos con escuelas privadas. A veces llega, por ejemplo, un niño a quinto y apenas se le está identificando porque tiene un retroceso en la lectoescritura. Entonces es un poco
Is
tardado.
the interpreter here? Because I'm hearing.
I know Maeve speaks Spanish, but I can let you know what she said if you need
Yeah,
help.
thank you. Is the
Hi.
interpreter?
Hi, yes, my name is Nora Ortiz. I'm the interpreter. I'll interpret for mom. I was
Thank you,
taking
thank you,
notes.
thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes, so mom is saying that after listening to your presentation, she wants to know what's next, what steps should be taken next, because for instance, she says that she's a member of different boards like DLAC, board, different school district boards, Measure T. So she's very involved. And
Great.
she says she's been reviewing a lot of data lately, and she's had a meeting with Dr. Baker, and she's made him see how her school, which is Hoover, where her kids attend, there's a lot of needs like the AC units and different needs for special education kids.
Yeah.
Also, she's concerned about the diminished personnel members in the school in all areas. She's spoken to Ms. Guadalupe from Hoover School, and they have an appointment coming with Dr. Baker to speak about this topic. So she wants to know what's next, especially for the services that special education kids need. She feels that new parents that are coming to the schools need more information. There is a family center at the school, but there's not enough information for the kids, and she would like to know what steps should be taken next so they could further this conversation along.
Yes, what I'd like to do is I would love for her, if she's comfortable, to email us, because I can connect her with my a colleague of mine, one of my team members who's a native Spanish speaker, to start having that conversation and to kind of talk further about what's been done so far, what's been talked about in those meetings, where there's been conflict or where conversations have stalled out. So it's a further conversation than what we're having tonight generally with all of us. But we do have, I'd love to connect and to have that conversation, including with one of my team members who's a native speaker. So I'll put in my email address again. And please reach out and I can connect. We can connect about that and hear a little bit more about the work that's been done so far. It sounds like you've been quite involved. Thank you. Yeah. That's great. And to that point, for those folks that aren't involved in SELPA.
Yeah, I was just gonna say to this SELPA part, I'm part of CAC, a Community Advisory Committee, and that's comprised from parents mostly from districts around the county. And I've been involved for, is it the second or third year now? And I had a chance to be part of the legislative day. They host the legislative day once a year, where you can advocate for bills and talk to senators or their staff members. You rarely talk to actual senator because they're always busy, but it was fun. Like I had to prepare a whole speech and use my personal experience.
Yeah.
Like my son being kind of included partially in like about his experience in school, and the bill I was advocating for was on inclusive education. I think it was Senate Bill 1113, and it didn't pass, I think, because they went in different direction. But I felt like just talking about this with our people who make decisions on a higher level for the whole state and statewide, it's good for them to hear from us, like directly from parents, directly from people who are affected. They want to hear our experience firsthand. Like that's all they cared about. Like, what was your firsthand experience? And that's the most valuable.
It's so true.
The more we talk about it, the more we educate them, right? The more they know what's going on.
Absolutely. And, speaking of SELPAs, before I move on to some other examples here, every SELPA in the state, including yours, has to have what they call an administrative unit. And that is the legal entity that is both the receiver of funds and is responsible for ensuring that eligible kids receive appropriate services. And so that administrative unit for you all is the San Mateo County Office of Education. Right. So knowing things like that and where is the administrative unit that's responsible for using those funds within a SELPA area, it's little things like that. So we'll talk some other examples, but absolutely. And I want to point out that as you're advocating, it's very important to think about others that are impacted by these same systems and thinking about how you can collect different stories and different experiences, and also ensure that you have representation from different parts of the community. And with that, keeping intersectionality in mind with your advocacy. For those that are less familiar, intersectionality is a term that was coined by a legal scholar and a civil rights activist, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, back in the late 1980s. And it's the whole concept and field of study of understanding that social categories intersect or overlap with a person's individual experience in a way that can make more obvious interlocking systems of privilege or interlocking systems of oppression. And so, it's recognizing that even if you share several social identities or identities, whether that's, nationality or race or geographic location or political affiliation or sexual orientation or marital status, even if you share some, recognizing the differences when those identities are layered, that experience for people is going to be very different than a different layering of identities. Socioeconomic is so many. So that's something to keep in mind so that you can make sure that your advocacy is intersectional, meaning you don't have to know it all, but you want to be able to ask and understand the experiences of other people that have different identities, different memberships in social belonging than you specifically do. And I know that's really important to SEPTAR, right? That you want to have multiple experiences and different perspectives coming to the table and working together so that systems are working better for all students and all families. So that's just really important. And I'll move quickly because I know we don't have a lot of time tonight, but I wanted to highlight that the concepts of intersectionality and advocacy and how that advances rights for people is very deeply embedded in both the disability rights movement, but even more importantly, the disability justice movement. And the disability justice movement, for anybody who's unclear, like what's the difference, right? disability rights, that's the classic disability rights movement that most of us think about in the 60s and 70s that really took off, including that was birthed here in the Bay Area, right? But disability justice is different. Disability justice is an intersectional movement that is focused on decolonialism, and it's focused and kind of led by queer communities and trans communities, disabled communities, Black and Indigenous communities, communities of color, women-led, right? So it's acknowledging that the original 1960s, 1970s disability rights movement, oftentimes the voices and the folks that were front and center were white men and white men with physical disabilities, right? So the concept of evolving those movements, and now that the disability justice movement is so much more intersectional, and they're able to make advances, pick up on the wonderful and strong and amazing foundation that our disability rights movement created, and then take it further for rights for more people, and recognizing how different communities can find common bonds in fighting for each other's rights and making systems better. And so thinking about that, just want to encourage the importance of intersectionality and thinking about whose perspective don't you have yet, and how might you engage them, even if you're just thinking about education, even if you're just thinking about, K through 8, for example, focused on the experience in the classroom for young children in your community. And then I just wanted to call this out before we move on to other examples, which is interdependence. Okay, so this here is based on some work of Naomi Ortiz and environmental justice and racial justice and disability justice movements. And in these movements and others, there's many conversations about the importance of interdependence. Communities that maybe don't intersect all the time, but are working together and saying, hey, we have this in common, so we need to talk to each other and work harder to represent each other in different spaces, because none of us can be everywhere at once, especially parents, right? There's way too much on your schedule already. So just wanted to highlight interdependence and intersectionality and where that comes into play with your advocacy. Okay, so if we think about, what your passion is, what your key issue or your issues are, you got to understand the flow of the dollars, right? So who's responsible, what advisory functions are in place, how's the money allocated, and what would better look like for that person. Okay, let me give you another example that might be relevant here. Does anybody here know about the local control accountability plans? Sometimes they're called LCAPs. Anyone?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, tell us
Well,
about them. Can you share a little bit about them?
Well, I've been invited to meetings. This is like my 3rd year.
Yeah.
I mean, usually there's a lot of district, people may is coming to those meetings, I think every month.
Yeah.
It's only at the end of the year. And there's a lot of teachers. There is not a lot of parents to go.
Nailed it.
Like it was like 2, maybe 3. Maybe Jacqueline goes there. But yeah, and I always feel like I'm the only parent there.
Yeah.
And it feels kind of intimidating sometimes, right? Because teachers know what they're talking about, and sometimes.
But parents do too, right?
They do, but
so for those that are less familiar, would it be helpful? Do you want me to define and talk a little bit about what that body is? Do you want me to share a little more about that for
I
folks?
think what we discussed is like, we have this sum of money, like what's the best way to allocate it, and then we brainstorm ideas together as a team, sometimes in small groups, like, okay, we want, invest in like behavioral support, like in this school, or we want to invest in like more, like I was advocating for UDL training, like Universal Design for Learning, that. And
UDL.
So yeah, you can advocate for whatever you think is important.
Yeah, so let's highlight that again. And Elena, if if you're able to, could you go on the school district website, and then you should be able to find LCAP. Otherwise, I can get the link and put it in later. But again, LCAP, folks, it's the Local Control Accountability Plan. All right. And it's an important way that that school districts are funded by the state through a local control funding formula process. And the acronyms are just nuts, right? But essentially that acronym is the LCFF, which is like the funding formula. Okay, so the LCAP, the Local Control Accountability Plan, meets to talk about the funding formula. School districts receive these additional funds based on the number of students who classify as low income, based on the students who classify as English learners, based on students who are foster youth within the district. And then the districts need to work in partnership with their community to decide how to use those funds. And so every year, schools need to be working with parents and educators and employees and students in the community around that planning process to say, how do we prioritize and allocate these funds to meet our district's goals? And to this point, Elena would like to not be the only parent in the room, right, at the next meeting. Keep an eye, take a look at the current plan. And thank you, Elena, for serving, and for anybody else that was involved in the accountability plan this last year. But keep tabs, and maybe Septar educates parents in the community of, hey, these meetings are coming up, you know, here's the amount of money. You get to decide how your district spends this money, right? Super important that we have students' feedback and family members' feedback in that. So that's just another example, okay? Let's look at a couple of other examples. I'm keeping an eye on the time. We're going to wrap up very soon, but I wanted to speed through and let you know, if you do not know who your state assembly member is, who your state senator is, who your congressional representative is, it's okay, but go ahead and use this link, okay? Use this link and find that, because it is so easy to just shoot off an email from time to time to your legislators about issues that matter to you. And remember, we're going back to that formula, frequency. Frequency is important. You need to start a relationship, not just when it's you know, legislative season, not just at the beginning of a school year, right? But you want to have those relationships, a certain level of maintenance in those relationships every year. And then we won't go into this evening, but if you guys want to learn more about the legislative process on a statewide level, about bills and how you can keep track of bills that are important to you, whether that's bills about disability services, bills about education, bills about transportation or housing or healthcare, whatever it is that's on your mind, we can talk about that. But this deck at least will give you a couple of links and where you can start to get more involved in that. And you can always reach out to my office and we can give you a little bit more assistance as well with that. But I can't, you know, especially we know how challenging schedules are, but this is where, again, divide and conquer, right? So if people can come together and say, hey, I can't be at every public meeting where decisions are made about my student. Ooh, Michelle's got something great in the chat. Yeah, the ARC of California, they have weekly meetings that give you some action items on disability. That's a great place to start at that entry level. That's a state level for statewide advocacy for people with IDD. Great example, Michelle. Being present and a part of the process, or allocating, making sure that you have representation from your community at public meetings, because we can't go to all of them. I can't, you can't, it's just not possible. But if you can at least keep track of them and make sure that you have some folks coming, then sharing the notes with you afterwards, right? Giving people updates about what's happening, then you can report back to community members and be stronger collaboratively. All right. And it's just, you know, find whatever way works of who's going to go to which meetings, how they're going to update us afterwards. And that's coalition building. Who else was in the room that maybe we haven't worked with, but dang, they had some public comment and they were very firm. And we need to reach out to them and see about collaborating, right? So again, it's how do we make our advocacy interdependent and intersectional? You meet new people that way. And then again, when we're talking about policymakers, it's about maintaining that relationship and sharing what's interesting for you, what's important to talk about for that person. I'm not going to give a target, but I would say to at least try to connect with your legislators, your assembly person, your state senator, and your congressional leader. Try at least a few times a year, right? About the issues that matter. If you go on their website, they'll say, because they love to brag, right? All electeds love to brag. They're going to tell you what their interests are, right? They're going to tell you the bills that they're authoring or that they're co-authoring. They're going to tell you, right? You're going to be able to see how they vote on issues that matter to you. And then you just comment on it, right? Hey, I really like this bill that you authored. Or, hey, I see you didn't vote on X, and X I really care about. Why didn't you vote on this? Right? So, I mean, that's just that. You don't have to have this big eloquent speech worked out. It can be just commenting on what you're seeing or what they're interested in and saying, hey, I see that you're interested in colleges, but can we talk about high schools in this community, right? So there you go, right? So it's just bringing things to the table about what matters to you and to your loved one. And then I just want to, with just a little bit of time we have left, I want to emphasize the preparation when you're having a meeting, especially if it's a one-on-one meeting with the policymaker, no matter what the level, okay, whether that's your superintendent or your principal or your a trustee that you're meeting with, or maybe it's a assembly person or a senator or a congressional leader, that you want to do some prep work, right? So that's where you've had that peppered, relationship starting. But when you have a meeting, you want to be highly organized, because meetings, especially with electeds on a state level, rarely go beyond 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. They have to be very, very quick. You have to pack a lot of things in. So you want to schedule that meeting. You want to think about what you're talking, what you want to talk about. Have they supported any bills in that area? Think of it this way. You want to prepare for it the way that you prepare for your own student's IEP meeting, right? You don't just show up, you don't just roll into an IEP meeting, right? I wish, but you can't. What do you have to do? You have to first know your rights, right? Maybe download the parental safeguards, right? And double check them about, okay, what's my rights in these meetings again? Let me remind myself. You want to be an informed participant in the process, right? You want to make sure the school is providing you with evaluations and proposed goals and objectives or placement recommendations before the meeting. You don't want to be surprised at the meeting. And then during the meeting, you want to ask for clarification if you hear a bunch of jargon or other terms you don't understand. And let's say you're going to your first IEP meeting. You also want to talk ahead of time to other parents that have been through this, right? You want to understand their experiences. You want to make sure that you have support groups or family resource centers or parent training and information centers. Want to make sure you have that contact information before your first IEP. So just the same way that you are preparing for your IEP, you're preparing for those meetings with electeds, whether it's on the local level or the state level. And then always have that element of data plus personal experience times frequency, right? Going back to that formula. And when we say data, the data doesn't have to be quantitative. It doesn't have to be statistics. It doesn't have to be your school's report card, okay? It doesn't have to be downloaded from DataQuest. If it is, awesome, right? But it doesn't have to be. It can be just trending information, or it can be information about how a current policy is impacting a school or impacting a student group. And then you're combining that with your own experience or your students' experience with that.
So I already started. You have 30 minutes left, okay? Don't waste your time on something else if you really care about that. Oops.
Yeah, it's okay. We got to prioritize our time. You got it. And then just want to wrap up. So when you're having that meeting, make sure that you're finishing strong. And again, I want to kind of share the shared elements of something like an IEP meeting with having a meeting with a policymaker. So when you're finishing that IEP meeting, right, you're making sure that everything that was talked about is written down, right? You're asking for a copy of that IEP to take home and read through. If you have any questions or you want to read through something before signing, you might sign and agree to part of it, but not other parts. Other parts you need to come back to the table and discuss more, work out. You want to, acknowledge any issues that are unresolved, but then also highlight what you do agree on, what you did resolve. And then you want to acknowledge the team and thank them for their efforts. So some of those like basic advocacy tactics for IEP meetings also apply for policy maker meetings, where you're not doing personal attacks, you're looking for that common ground, you're being clear about here's what we agree upon, here's what we don't agree upon, and I'm going to give you data and my personal experience and the frequency of communication so that you can look at this different path that I want you to look down. And then the follow-up, right? Making sure that there's nothing left undone, meaning if there needs to be a follow-up meeting and you're, after your IEP, then you have it. Same thing. You want to make sure there's a follow-up email after you meet with a policymaker. You want to make notes about your next engagement with them, where you might see them and what you want to bring up, and making sure that you're acknowledging them and thanking them for their efforts, even if you didn't see eye to eye with everything. All right. So to wrap up, so you guys can get out the door, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get the deck. I want to show you what else we have in this deck. We have contact information for regional offices of the State Council. We have some other contact information here, my email address. We have some just helpful, what I think are some great reads on access and inclusion that you might want to take a look at some point. Particularly helpful, I think, for when you think about events or activities that you might want to do as a PTA. There's some good stuff here, including around access and how to hold inclusive events, and making sure that you're bringing more people to the table to share in your advocacy effort. So I thought that would be helpful for you all. And again, please reach out. I'm happy to connect you to one of my team members, including native Spanish speakers, to talk specifically about what's going on for you and your advocacy efforts. And I'd be happy to come back too for us to talk further.
Thank you so much, Sheraden. That was wonderful. Lots of amazing just ideas for our families. And I just want to share my personal experience with reaching out to, senators when I was advocating for bills, and it was so easy. It was very surprisingly easy to find their emails. I know it doesn't go directly to them, but I got an answer back, and I keep getting those emails from, Anna Eshu. I get emails every week. Senator Mullen, I get his emails,
Yeah.
Like I feel like even though it doesn't come directly from them, I feel like I'm connected somehow. They send us their updates, and it's good to have to create that relationship, right?
It is. And by the way, our office of the State Council holds regional advisory committee meetings every 2 months in the evenings, just every 2 months. We always have between 3 and 12 legislative offices attending those meetings and directly engaging with people with disabilities and family advocates. So if you want to get on our email list to find out about those, you're welcome to come. That's a great way to connect with legislators, in addition to the direct outreach that you're talking about, Elena. And then Elena, will someone on the executive team also send out those handouts and worksheets that I sent you guys? Because I have some simple worksheets that maybe you do when you get together at another event, just really simple ones that can be helpful, especially for family members that are newer in advocacy in this way.
Oh, yeah. We send them out. Do you want me to pull them out now, or?
Well, it's 8:30. I think we all have to go now, but if you can email those out, and then people can reach out to my office, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to add that there was a resolution on inclusive education, I think created by another PTA from another county in California, and we endorsed it as SEPTAR. And it was pretty comprehensive.
I'll bring it up, actually.
Yeah. So it was very exciting that the PTA, like we are part of PTA, right, SEPTAR, that we also can advocate on a higher level and advocate for our kids, and then go to Sacramento, speak up and take a stand and share our experiences. I was
This
actually.
was really big. Will
Yeah.
you also send this out to folks, and I can send it to you if you're not sure where it's posted?
Yeah, please send it to me. We got it directly from Karen Cole, who created it. We have it as a kind of PDF format.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, and it's a big deal, folks, and it's something to be proud of for your PTA and every other across the state dedicated towards inclusive education, identifying racial and ethnic disparities in systems, acknowledging intellectual and developmental disabilities, and acknowledging not just in the classroom, but extracurricular activities, including sports and the arts. It's terrific, and it was just passed like a month ago. I mean, maybe not even a month ago. So
Yeah.
this is a big deal, and congratulations to you all. I'm thrilled with it. You should be too, and I think you can use this in your advocacy. This is one of your tools, right? So this combined with your personal experience times frequency can help you change things. Can help you make systems even better for your student and other students all across.
Definitely. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I'll stop sharing. I know folks got to get going, but hope to connect with you all again. And please feel free to reach out, and we can keep chatting. And our team is happy to provide some technical assistance or systems navigation for your specific needs.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate this partnership, and we're probably gonna ask you to speak for next year, just to continue this conversation.
Happy